Well, good afternoon, HASP scholars and the fewer scholars that are here in the HASP classroom. My name's Tom Glover. I'm serving as coordinator for the HASP class, Understanding the Core of the Israel-Palestinian Conflict, presented by John Kleinhexel. Mr. Kleinhexel is a retired pastor who has served in both RCA churches and the Presbyterian Church USA. His call to the Christian ministry has taken him to pastorates in Western Michigan, Illinois, Florida, and New Jersey. He holds a BA from Hope College, majoring in English and philosophy. He received his theological training at New Brunswick Theological Seminary in New Jersey and Western Theological Seminary here in Holland. He retired from full-time ministry in 2003. Since that time, Mr. Kleinhexel served as a wedding coordinator for the American Church in Paris, France for 6 months, and 5 months as an associate pastor for education at a United Church of Christ in Tokyo, Japan. That's quite a retirement. The thrust of his retirement activities involve his lifelong interest in problems in the Middle East. His interest in this subject really took off in 1975 while he and 8 other RCA clergymen were on a tour of several Middle Eastern countries. It was on this trip that a bus taking them to the Beirut airport was accosted by armed youth. This experience led him to become involved in Kairos, which is a global network of people who are pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, and pro-peace. He has visited Israel-Palestine area 3 times, and in 2017, helped found the West Michigan chapter of the Global Kairos Network. He'll talk more about that during his presentations. He and his wife Sharon have 3 grown children and 7 grandchildren. And as you are aware, Mr. Kleinhexel's presentation is in 3 parts. In session 1 last week, he concentrated on understanding the Jewish and Arab Palestinian identities. Today, his emphasis will be on the explanation of the Christian Zionist perspective and its implications on the United States policy toward the conflict. With that, please welcome Reverend John Kleinhexel to the HASP classroom and to the computer screens out in our Zoom audience.
Thank you very much, Tom. Appreciate that, Tom, and welcome again, friends. I see we have fewer people in the classroom today because of the bad weather, but we're welcoming people online as well as in the classroom. You may wonder, what does Christian Zionism have to do with understanding the situation in Israel-Palestine? I hope to answer that question today. It's very important that we understand the role of Christian Zionism in support of the state of Israel. So we're going to be in session 2. I've got help from Alex Awad, a retired pastor, and Gary Burge, a colleague of mine who is now teaching at Calvin Seminary in Grand Rapids. So we are going to begin with last week, someone commented, well, can we see some maps of the area? And I want to show you a map of the area, if I can get it to work. There we go. This is from a little history of the land of Israel-Palestine from 1917 to 1939, and in 39, a mostly Arab population. 46, Zionist Jews controlled a lot of the land. 47 to 49, Israel declared their independence, and they were born. 67, they expanded into the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. and occupied all of historic Palestine. In 1993, Yasser Arafat signed the Oslo Agreement along with Yitzhak Rabin for self-rule in urban areas. But even today, Palestinian national aspirations remain elusive. So that's a little bit of an overview of the map. Some of you may have heard of the rapture fiction. William Bernstein, The Delusions of Crowds, Why People Go Mad in Groups, recounts the astounding commercial success of the rapture fiction. Evangelical science fiction spun around the book of Revelation's prediction that on the eve of the end of the world, believing Christians will be whisked to earth from earth to heaven, raptured, while hundreds of millions of non-believers and non-Christians will be slaughtered in the War of Armageddon. So you have Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins with the Left Behind novels that sold more than 65 million copies. I remember reading Hal Lindsey's book, The Late Great Planet Earth, and maybe some of you have heard of it or read it as well. I want to give you a typical Christian Zionist platform, and I think you'll begin to see the relevance of the Christian Zionist emphasis. They believe that the restoration of the Jewish nation in 1948 is clearly a sign from God that the end is coming soon. A last battle will literally be waged between the enemies of God and God's people, Israel. At that moment, which is almost, we're right on top of it now, it could happen anytime, Jews will have the opportunity to accept or receive Jesus as their true Messiah. Believers will be raptured to heaven and unbelievers will be condemned to hell. So the corollary of the Christian Zionist platform is that if the United States and anybody in the world does not give unqualified support to the Israeli Jewish state, is to go against God and be cursed. Well, that's a pretty big incentive for supporting Israel, I would say, if their viewpoint, if their interpretation of Scripture is true and accurate. I'm going to say that there's an alternative way of interpreting Scripture that is different. Okay, Alex Awad, writing in the Washington Report, as a retired Methodist pastor in Bethlehem. A few milestones in my personal life have led to my confrontation with Zionist Christianity. I'll let you read through that briefly. Just the first sentence would give you an overview. What I want to get to is his summary of the Zionist beliefs. The contemporary state of Israel, as I said, is an extension of biblical Israel. Promises of God in the Old Testament concerning the land are now being fulfilled in the state of Israel. 3, God intervened in the 1948 war and the 1967 war in favor of the state of Israel in miraculous ways. The nation that provides support to Israel will be blessed by God, and punishment will fall on the states and nations that oppose Israel. The Christian Zionist support for the state must not be conditioned on Jewish people's faith in Christ, or by the moral conduct of the Israeli people, or by the way they treat Palestinians. That's irrelevant as far as they're concerned. Many Jews will believe in Christ at the time of the second coming, but many of them will be killed during the Great Tribulation and the warfare. And by the way, this is going to be a literal warfare. This is going to be a literal bloodbath. And it's just around the corner. Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims are fundamental obstacles to the way of fulfillment of prophecies because of their adherence to the right of Palestinians to remain on the land of promise. When a Palestinian evangelical rejects these teachings, he or she soon realizes that they are at odds with the leadership. Palestinian Christians understand that the mother church is suffering from a serious theological disease, and he or she must expose this epidemic and provide the appropriate vaccine, which is serious study of the Word of God. Okay, that's a little overview. Now I want to say this, the assumption is that the current conflict in the Middle East is caused by Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims who are out of touch with the will of God as it concerns the land of Israel. And they are conspiring, and their deepest desire is to destroy Israel. That's the assumption of Christian Zionists. So you can imagine that they fit right in with the Israeli Zionist position, which is that any resistance by Palestinians is proof that they are terrorists and that Israel is entitled to defend itself from those who would destroy it. So why should we study Christian Zionism in our effort to understand the core of the conflict? I suggest that the main reason is because it is the default position in the subconscious minds of most Americans. That is that the state of Israel is the new form of God's chosen people, the Jews, through whom God will bring about the end times. So see, the point is that Christian Zionists see the state of Israel and Jews as really of one piece. They see the promise of the Old Testament that the land will be restored. And so they don't want to have the New Testament change that promise in the Old Testament. They want that promise to be fulfilled of land. So they don't want to bring into the discussion anything that the New Testament says about land or the nation of Israel. So keep that in mind. They are to have unquestioned support, even as they discriminate against the indigenous Arabs who are not part of God's chosen people, discounting what God did to include Gentiles as God's chosen and precious, as we'll see shortly. The state of Israel is exceptional and does not need to give full citizenship rights to the folks in Gaza, the West Bank, or East Jerusalem Arabs. They do not need to give full citizenship rights to the people in Gaza. Now, as you can see, Amnesty International, I don't know how you feel about Amnesty International. They are highly reputed in looking into human rights injustices. Now, they have joined the Israeli non-governmental organization called Beit Salim and the Human Rights Watch in declaring unequivocally that the Israeli state is guilty of apartheid. Two tiers of citizenship, one that favors Jews and another that discriminates against Arabs. So it's becoming clearer and clearer that it's a two-tiered system, analogous to the apartheid in South Africa. John Hagee is one of the leaders in the Christian Zionist movement, even to this day. And at a conference, an IPAC conference in March, he said this to them: Jews in the United States who are part of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. There are millions of evangelical Christians across America who consider the Jewish people the apple of God's eye, who see you Jews as the chosen people, a cherished people, and a covenant people with an eternal covenant that will stand forever. Ladies and gentlemen of IPAC, it's a new day in America. The sleeping giant of Christian Zionism has awakened. There are 50 million Christians standing up and applauding the state of Israel. The Christian Zionist heresy began with John Nelson Darby. Was born in 1800, and by 1830, he had come up at 30 years of age with this notion of the Old Covenant as the literal truth for Israelis, that when their country would be reestablished, they would be restored to their former greatness, and that would be a sign of God's end times. It was popularized by the Schofield Bible, and many of us in the Midwest were exposed to Christian Zionism through Dwight L. Moody. How many of you have ever listened to WMBI when you were growing up? I see a few hands. I watched it. I listened to it. Moody Bible Institute Radio. They espoused the Christian Zionist, or the so-called dispensational point of view. Well, so we have two competing interpretations. One is the Christian Zionist view, and the other is what I would call the covenant view. So let's look at those. These I have this for each one of you in the classroom today. There are the two covenants and the chart of comparison with 6 categories: the nation, the land, the city, the temple, the priesthood, and the sacrifice. And in every case, the Zionists want to say that the nation Israel is the end point, and getting them to the promised land is the end point for the end times, and restoring Jerusalem and getting the third temple built and having the priestly duties restored, and perhaps even animal sacrifice, although I haven't heard much of that from them. And the covenant interpretation of the scriptures is that instead of just Israel as being restored, all believers, including Gentiles, are now able to claim the title chosen. Even Gentiles can be the chosen people. Of course, this is an ongoing battle that the Jews have with Christians. They were opposed to what Jesus had to say when he was in his ministry. I could say more about that, but let's look at these one at a time. The nation, to counter the notion that Israel is to be the chosen people. In Colossians 3, Paul writes, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience." In other words, Gentiles as well as Jews are included in this designation, God's chosen people. And we think of the land. Here's a picture of the map. It's a map of the area. You see Jerusalem down near the lower central part. Bethel, Sea of Galilee near the top, and the Dead Sea there, Bethlehem below Jerusalem, about 6 miles. So Jesus has this conversation with the Samaritan woman in John 4, and she says, I can see that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshiped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. And Jesus says to her, "Believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father, neither on this mountain, Samaria, nor in Jerusalem. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth." So according to the scriptures in John's account of the gospel, Jesus says, no, it's not a restored Jerusalem. It's not a restored temple. It's those who worship God with their whole heart, with their whole spirit, no matter where they are in the globe. So the city, again, is relativized. Those in the Old Testament who want to stay in the Old Testament say, if I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. And it is meant the literal Jerusalem, Jerusalem that's restored to Israeli sovereignty. And yet Jesus says to them, Jerusalem as we know it will be cast down. I wanted to gather you together as a hen gathers her chicks, but you would not. You were not willing. You did not recognize the things that make for peace, and your house will be left desolate, meaning the temple and even the city. And Jesus wept over the city. And the goal for believers, Christians who are not of the Christian Zionist persuasion, see the holy city, the New Jerusalem, which is not just the literal Jerusalem. Now, there may be room for us to understand that Jews are meant to have their capital, are meant to have their own country. Please don't misunderstand that. It is a truly remarkable thing that Jews have come into their ancient land and want to build their own country. The unfortunate thing is that it has been at the expense of the indigenous people. And it has been compounded by Christian Zionists who have said that this nation of Israeli Jews is so exceptional that they are free to do what they want independently of how they treat the people in the land. This is the tragedy. This is the tragedy. So Christians of the covenant persuasion in interpreting the scripture see the importance of the new creation, not just literal Jerusalem, but a kingdom of relationships that has God at the center. And there's love there as the love of a groom for the bride. And there is love and joy and commitment and peace, shalom. So again, the temple, Christian Zionists want to see perhaps the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock. There are some radicals in Israel, the extremists, who do want to destroy it, and others want to say, well, we want to put a temple alongside of the Muslim temple. That is still up for grabs, friends. That's still up for grabs. Christian Zionists would support Israel in saying, you may have your temple, even if it means the destruction of the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I don't think it takes a very wild imagination for you to imagine what the Muslim world would do if someone put dynamite or would destroy those two symbols of Muslim presence in Jerusalem. Well, what a beautiful temple we have. It's going to be a time when not one stone will be left on another. Every one of them will be thrown down. The emphasis of the covenant interpretation of the scriptures that takes into account the New Testament says that our body is the locus, the place where the Spirit of God dwells. Not just the temple, not just a building, which represents the presence of God. You are not your own, you were bought with a price. Honor God with your body. That's the emphasis of people who want to go to the New Testament and see it there. The priesthood. You, Gentiles and Jews, are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's people belonging to God. This is a quote from Exodus 19, verses 3 and 4, which was said of the people of God in the Old Testament. Now it's ascribed to the church. You are the chosen people, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, this is now a quotation from the Old Testament prophet Hosea. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. And sacrifice. The blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of the heifer sprinkled on those who are ceremonially unclean, sanctify them so that they are outwardly clean. How much more then will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself, cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death, so that we may serve the living God? Christ is the sacrifice, and we give our lives in sacrificial service to others. That's the sacrifice that God looks for. So in summary, the old covenant has been transcended. Now, the dispensational point of view is that there are at least two dispensations. They say there are 7, but the 2 main ones are the covenant with the Jews has never been destroyed. It still is in effect, and it will come to fruition. So they ignore the teaching of the New Testament about the church. They ignore that about the church. They don't want to see the church as replacing or superseding Israel in any way. And I guess that's a very testy doctrine. This replacement theology is very tricky, and we could spend a lot of time trying to unpack it. But the point is that they see God wanting to fulfill the land promises, the temple promises, the restoration promises, and that has now happened in 1948, and its expansion and solidification. And that's a signal that the end is coming. And so Israel is not to be judged like any other nation. They are exceptional. And they are not a race, they are Jews. So this is part of what I'm trying to make plain. The old covenant has been transcended. Now we see in Christ, God's passion is to gather both Jews and Gentiles into his new community. As far as the gospel is concerned, Jews are enemies on your account. As far as election is concerned, they're called and they are loved on account of the patriarchs, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Rachel and Leah. They are loved on account of the patriarchs, for God's gifts and his call are irrevocable. When Christians who are opposed to the Christian Zionist point of view are accused of hating Jews or being anti-Semitic, that's not true. God has not set aside his love for the Jews. But when they wed the Jewishness, the Judaism as a religion with the nation state, as though that nation state is exempt from being held accountable for how states are to live with the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed, then we have a problem. Since the new covenant is not based on the possession of land, or a city, a restored city, or a restored temple, or animal sacrifices, or a tribe or race, therefore the claims of Christian Zionism, in our view, are void from a new covenant perspective. Christian Zionism attempts to influence people to return to the old covenant from which Christ and his apostles liberated us 2,000 years ago. So in another summary statement, does God intend a restored Israel? Well, yes, perhaps so. But they will be held accountable like any other nation. That's the key thing. When the prophets railed against Israel and Judah and Israel, the northern and the southern kingdom, it was the other nations surrounding them were included in God's oversight. So no one is exempt from doing the right thing, loving mercy, doing justice, and being and humbly serving God. Now I want to, we're doing okay here. I want to stop a moment and see if there are any comments or questions that the people here in the classroom have, or how are you doing on this? Is this making any sense to you? Okay. Terry Nyheis, who's a graduate of Fuller Seminary, shakes his head yes. So that's a good thing. And he says he knows about dispensationalism from Fuller Seminary. I would expect so, yes. Other comments, get your thinking caps on. We'll have a lot of time at the end for discussion. I'm quite confident. Gary Burge has become a friend of mine. He taught at Wheaton for a long time when I first got to know him. He's a member of the board of Kairos USA, which is the United States branch of people who are wanting to respond favorably to the cry for help from Palestinian Christians. And Gary has since left Wheaton and is now on the staff as a professor at Calvin Seminary. So he has written a book called Jesus and the Land, which is a challenge, a New Testament challenge to Christian Zionists. And he has 4 points. And the first one is that Jesus subverts the land politics of Judaism. If you look carefully at the 4 accounts of the good news, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus makes no mention of restoring Israel to earthly sovereignty. No mention of restoring Israel to sovereignty. In the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 1, after his resurrection, his disciples say to Jesus, "Are you going to restore the kingdom to Israel now that we see you're raised from the dead and you are truly the Messiah, like David, is this the time you're going to restore the earthly kingdom of Israel?" And Jesus deflected that. Some are saying, well, he meant it to be deflected until 1948, and now the time is ripe for Israel to be restored. But what others of us say, the true interpretation is what he says next. This is not for you to decide on your own. You will receive the Holy Spirit, and you will begin in Jerusalem. You will go to Judea and Samaria and to the whole ends of the world with the good news that I have love for everyone. There is no partiality. There is no Jewish superiority. I'm sorry, that's not my kingdom. So Jesus subverts the land politics of Judaism. The meek or the gentle will inherit the earth. Matthew 5:5, quoting Psalm 37:12 through 15. Thus, any who follow Jesus' active, nonviolent resistance against abusive oppression will inherit the earth, not a restored nation of Israel. Christianity is not land-based. It is not as though Christianity is going to go out of existence if Israel is set aside, if the United States is set aside, if Russia is set aside, if any nation on the face of the earth is transcended. Christianity is bigger than any nation. For present-day Israeli Zionists, Israel is land-based. And Christian Zionists also believe that God intends a land-based restored Israel, signaling the imminent return of Jesus, the Messiah. So what Paul does in the New Testament, if we allow the New Testament to be helpful in knowing what the Old Testament meant in pointing to the fulfillment that Jesus gives us. Paul says it is no longer ethnic Abraham. It is no longer the physical, literal descendants of Jews who will rule a restored nation. It is the children of Abraham, including Gentiles, who by faith will possess the whole earth. If you study Romans, especially 4:13, you will see where that is really fleshed out by Paul. The New Testament envisions a new country. And here again, it's metaphorical, isn't it? You don't have the literalism anymore, which is really interesting. Everyone really has a sense of the literalness of the scriptures, but everyone who also wants to be literal knows that there's some metaphorical or spiritual understanding. For example, in the book of Joshua, it is really a wrong interpretation to think that God sanctions genocide against non-Jewish people. What is warfare? If we are not cautious about principles of interpretation of the scripture, we can have God being responsible for a lot of bad stuff that is unworthy of a God to worship, a God that I want to worship. So the New Testament envisions a new country, which is a metaphor for citizenship in the realm where God rules and dwells. The goal is no longer a restored Judea, Samaria, with Jerusalem as its eternal, undivided capital. By faith, Abraham kept his eye on the unseen city, designed and built by God, their true home, a far better country, a heavenly country. Hebrews 11. So that's the New Testament view. And Christian Zionists don't want to go there. They want to stay in the Old Testament and see that fulfilled. So I want to urge you, if you want to learn a little bit more about Christian Zionism, to go to this wonderful site that's called christianzionism.org. It was originated by John Hubers, a Reformed Church in America missionary and teacher at Northwestern College. He gave it over to a board of people who are maintaining it. And I've learned a lot from it. And I want to take you to that site right now. christianzionism.org, a place to discover and explore God's heart for the Holy Land. Frequently asked questions. And a new section in this website called Why I Am Not a Christian Zionist. Many thoughtful Christians have looked carefully at Zionism and been surprised at what they find. There are a number of essayists who give the reason why they are not Christian Zionists. Bruce Fisk, we had addressing us in Western Michigan on Christian Zionism, has his home in Peru. David Crump and Gary Burge has an entry in it. And the originator of the response of Kairos Palestine, a cry for help, was responded to by a Jesus-following Jew named Mark Braverman. He is the head of Kairos USA. Tom Getman is a dear friend of mine that I met when I went to Israel in 2000. He was at that time the head of World Vision, served as an aide to the late Senator Mark Hatfield. Oops, and there's a guy you may have heard of. let's take a look. Let's take a little careful look at what I have to say. Three reasons why I'm not a Christian Zionist. I agree with the vast majority of scholars who affirm God's aim in the Bible is a new community consisting of Jews and Gentiles, not a restored Jewish state. Again, I'm not saying that it's terrible that the Jewish state has been restored. No, that's not what I'm saying. But it needs to be in the right perspective. Secondly, Christian Zionism looks forward to a bloody climactic battle at the end of time that will usher in God's kingdom. In my view, this is contrary to the kingdom of God that has already begun in Jesus, his death and resurrection. Jesus envisions a different sort of order, not one that leverages politics in the modern world. And thirdly, Christian Zionism promotes a triumphalism that is oppressive. It harms all of the inhabitants in the Holy Land and models an unmerciful oppression, now being imitated by other nations around the world. These last two paragraphs, there's really irony there. I've become a friend of a wonderful Palestinian Christian named Nora Kermi. Those of you who go with us this coming October, end of October into November, will meet Nora, a beautiful lady. I ran a draft of my statement to her, and she said, it is really ironic that Palestinians are looked upon as aliens. We were the ones who populated this country for centuries. And we are, I guess, not permitted to see as Jews as aliens to our country. But even if Jews are the ones who are populating the land now and wanting to claim it all for themselves, they are given strict instructions by Leviticus 19, which is part of the Pentateuch. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So this is really a stunning thing for Jews to have to be told this. The report that came out yesterday by Amnesty International is a clear representation of the fact that Jews refuse to give full citizenship rights to the 20% Arabs in Israel who are second-class citizens. They are permitted to vote. There is right now an Arab Palestinian in the coalition that's running the country. Mansour Abbas is his name. He represents a very small but very influential party of Muslims in Israel called the United Front. So it's a huge experiment now as to how long an Arab Palestinian will be allowed to help shape the decisions of the country of Israel. So in some ways you say, well, how can this change? And yet there has been tremendous change in Israel. Four parties got together, and in order to, four Arab parties got together. No, I take that back. There were four different leaders, formerly from Likud and other parties, that joined together to form this coalition so that they could unseat Benjamin Netanyahu. After so many years, there was so much opposition to Netanyahu in close league with President Trump and the Zionist movement in the United States, Vice President Pence, and also Secretary of State Pompeo, strong Christian Zionists, that these four parties, including this Arab party, are now ruling the country. And so it's you say, well, nothing is changing in Israel-Palestine. It's not true. It's not true. There are changes that are taking place. So let's get out of this slide and get back to our main presentation. There are those of us who believe that the Christian Zionist movement gives theological cover, justification to the Israeli Zionist goal of ethnically cleansing the indigenous natives, the Arab Palestinians, as though God works only through Jews, only through Jewish ethnocracy, only through a Jewish, purely Jewish state. So when Christian Zionists join Israeli Zionists, they are really saying that, yes, you are right to discriminate against the Palestinians. They are never going to be part of the chosen people. And those of us who are of the covenantal interpretation of the New Testament say, what? What? What about the pluralism that is celebrated in the United States and in many other democratic countries where one race of people does not dominate, but everyone has a place at the table? What about that? So this is a real existential struggle, and Palestinians are under the heel of a Jewish first mentality right now. So where do we go from here? I want to say some things about that. We're going to do, I've been revising and adding to and subtracting to the last session. The payoff of this class is going to be next week, because we are going to really look at a lot of alternatives. We're going to look at some progress. We're going to look at some things that are obstacles to resolving the so-called conflict. I want to say this: although the vast majority of Jews globally support their brothers and sisters in the Jewish homeland, they choose to remain in their pluralistic countries. If there are 7 million Jews in Israel, there are 7 million Jews living in many nations of the world. They're invited to come. They're invited to come to Israel. Israel wants them to come. Guess what? They want to stay where they are. They want to stay in the diaspora. There are more and more Jews in North America seeking to break down, dismantle the 1897 Zionist model for enforced Jewish dominance. They are advocating for a pluralistic, multicultural, multi-ethnic, democratic state not just a democratic state for Jews, but a democratic state for Gentiles, Palestinians, Arabs, Yemeni, Ethiopian Jews, and others that respects the human rights of all. Although the original European, which means Polish and Russian and German Jewish settlers still strongly resist it, the younger generations see this movement as irresistible, irresistible. And the Kairos movement, which I represent, seeks to dismantle one of the settler, the dismantlement of the settler colonial project that embraces the one democratic state campaign as detailed here. I don't think I'm going to get into it today. I'm going to save this for next week. But you see, look at the danger of saying dismantling. When you say you want to dismantle Zionism, that is a code word for Israeli Jews of saying you want to destroy Israel. You want to destroy the nation. You want to delegitimize. You want to say we're not legitimate. And so you have this notion of, and I remember many years ago talking to Israeli leaders, Jewish leaders who said, well, we can't lose the majority in our country. If we lose the majority of people in our country, we're going to be destroyed. People don't tolerate Jews. Don't you understand that when they're in control, they want to destroy us. They want to get rid of us. So it's really something that is deeply embedded in the personality of the existing rulers in Israel. It's the younger generation that's going to make the change. Okay, now it's time for some discussion. We've got a lot of time for discussion. I would like to hear some of you say something to this discussion question. Is the emphasis on Christian Zionism overblown by me or by other people? Why or why not? Does someone want to make a comment about that one way or another? Tom, help us out with that. Yeah, here's the microphone. I think it's on. I said it wrong for somebody who wants to make a comment.
Anybody would like to make a comment or ask a question or?
There's a comment back there.
Just make sure the microphone is turned on, okay?
The green light on it.
Do you think that the majority of Jews would support Christian Zionism?
We're not hearing anything. Let me come in.
Do you believe that the majority of Jews would support Christian Zionism, or because it seems like there might be aspects of it while it supports Israel, it's not definitely supporting Jewish people if they're not going to convert to Christianity, right? If you're talking, as I understood you saying, there would be a time when Jews could either ascend to heaven or go to hell, depending on their acceptance of the Messiah. Is that right?
I don't really know how to answer that question, sir. I'm not inside the Jewish mind deeply enough, I suppose. I have often questioned whether Christians have a right to bring their insights into the way people are to get along to the Jewish society, to the Jewish state. They will say, well, you have no right to impose your views on how people are supposed to get along. We're wanting to build a Jewish democracy that will be a blessing to everybody in the world. And this is how we're going about doing it. And we don't want to have anyone questioning how we're doing it. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
That's good. I have just a couple of other things, if I can. When he showed the map, it was pretty much present day Israel and Gaza and the West Bank. If there was a broader map and it was like the 1947 UN map, wouldn't it show Egypt and Jordan as controlling the lands that the Palestinians are in Gaza and the West Bank now? And what happened with Egypt and Jordan taking over those areas?
Egypt and Jordan were defeated in the '67 war. Jordan still has some say about overseeing who gets to go into the Temple Mount and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Egypt has a treaty with Israel through Carter, and Jordan has an agreement with Israel. And they seem to be at peace with Israel. There are the Syrians have had some land taken away from them in the '67 war, the Golan Heights. Israel has annexed that. Israel has annexed East Jerusalem and has declared that it is the eternal undivided capital of Israel. So they're working very hard to eliminate any Palestinians left in East Jerusalem. They don't want Palestinians there. So they're slowly tightening the noose, saying you can't come back. If once you leave, you can't come back in. They are allowing Jews to make claims on property, houses, homes in Sheikh Jarrah, for example, in Silwan. And when the pressure builds from the United States on this Jordanian property before '67, and Egyptians were involved there, then they back away and delay the home demolitions. The Sheikh Jarrah right now is an example. There's a big outcry even by the Biden administration that you can't do this. You can't demolish these homes. These people have been here for a long, long time. So that Jordan is a home for a lot of Palestinian Arabs who fled Israel. There are a lot of Palestinians living in Jordan, not so many in Egypt, but Palestinians are living all over the world because they've fled from the warfare that broke out in '47, '48. Jordan and Egypt are definitely part of the Arab world that is having to cope with Israel and listen to their Palestinian Arab brothers and sisters. Are there other comments that some others have
Can I
to make?
just add one thing to one thing I just wanted to mention was, I think when you talk about Israel being a country that's doing things that are unacceptable, I think that some people who would claim that some of the criticism is anti-Semitic would say it becomes anti-Semitic not because they think Israel's perfect and they're not going to do things that are absolutely wrong, but that they're held to a higher standard than any other country in the world. And if you look at their human rights record, it's better than other countries. And to criticize Israel as an anti-Semitic, but to criticize them at a higher standard than you criticize anybody else in the world is. But I don't expect you to agree with that.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that comment. Do you think that your presence in this class has made any difference in how you see what's going on in Israel and Palestine? And if so, how? How do you see any difference? I see a hand anywhere here. I want to say that to this gentleman who raised the issue of the bar of criticism, it is true there are human rights abuses all over the world. Myanmar is a prime example of what the Chinese are doing to Muslims in one of their provinces. I'm not sure which one. There are human rights abuses all over the world. And so why are we picking on Israel-Palestine? I think it's a fair criticism. And I don't want to minimize the abuse that's happening in many parts of the world, but Israel-Palestine is a microcosm, in my view, of how we need to resolve issues between different people. And if we can solve that problem, if we can really have some progress there, it might be a model for other people in the world to resolve their disputes. Yes.
So, I mean, I picked up a lot from, last week and this week, but oftentimes you hear that the, intent of at least some, and maybe I misunderstand this, some element within the Palestinian regime would want to destroy the Jewish state. Is that correct, or is that overblown, or is there a gray area that, yeah, some people would want to eliminate the Jewish state and the Jewish population totally because kind of the retribution effect?
I appreciate that comment very much. And yes, there are some people that wanted to get in on the chat, so we'll hear them next. I want to say that you have a very important point. It seems to me that there are extremists among Palestinians who say, we want the whole land and we do not want one Jew in this country. Those people are in the minority, but what Jews like to do is they like to point to them, and they play off from them and say, you see, that's really the true position of Arab Palestinians. That is really what's going on. And they overemphasize the extremist position which is there. And in some ways, the Palestinians are also liking to say, which I maybe tend to say in my defense of Arab Palestinians, the Jews really want to eliminate all of us. They want to destroy all of us. They want to take over everything, and they don't want us to have any say in their country. So that's an extremist accusation against the Jews. And so what's happening, in my view, sir, is this. Because anytime someone brings up a moderating position, one that sort of tilts toward justice for Palestinians, oh, no, you can't do that. They want it, don't you understand? They want to destroy us. And when Palestinians say there's some Jewish stuff that is going in their direction, oh, you can't really trust that. You can't really trust that because don't you know, they want to get rid of us. They want to get rid of us. So that is the problem in many parts of the world, and certainly there, the problem of extremism. Those who are moderating, those who are in the middle and saying, well, the Palestinians may have a point. They may have how can you say that? So we have to be willing to support people who are wanting to bring about a positive change.
Yeah, that sounds a bit like a description of the U.S. Senate.
We've got those same forces that work in the United States, don't we? Sue has a chat question.
Yeah, sorry, it's a little loud. Question from the chat. Have the Christian Zionists been on the move to gain more media attention, or are they trying to work undetected until some future time when they will act on strength?
Say that again, Sue. I want to be sure I understand it.
Okay, have the Christian Zionists been on the move to gain more media attention, or are they trying to work undetected until which time they can act in strength?
I am thinking that Christian Zionists are wanting to influence American policy for sure. They are not wanting the Biden administration to give any credence to Palestinian grievances. And so as I'm going to say next week, Biden has begun very courageously with Blinken going to the highest officials in Israel and saying, we want justice and human rights for the Palestinians. They've said it. And it's a credit to Biden and Blinken that's the official position of the United States. Christian Zionists are fighting that position. They don't want to have certainly a separate state for the Palestinians because it takes away from Israeli control of the whole country, which they believe is right and God ordained. So I think that Christian Zionists are influential in the United States. I don't know the extent of their power, except that it's there. And when we start advocating for human rights for Palestinians, they come out of the woodwork and they're really saying, you are opposed to the Jewish state. You're opposing the Jewish state. You're anti-Semitic. You want to see the destruction of Israel. And that is not what we're interested in doing. Do you have any strategies for me or for us in talking to your friends or neighbors? Have you, let me put it this way, have you had any conversation with anybody in your lifetime or recently about Israel-Palestine where their point of view has come out and you are saying, well, there's maybe another way to look at it? Anyone want to bite on that one? I remember a conversation with a Christian Zionist who argued for the centrality of Jerusalem and the need for a restored Israel, and that it's happened. And I took him to the John 4 passage where Jesus says to the Samaritan woman, it's not whether you're going to be worshiping in Jerusalem or in Ramallah or wherever it's going to be, it's that you are worshiping God in your heart and that you're loving God and that you're serving other people. That's the important thing, not whether an earthly nation is going to be restored and maintained. And he was unable to receive that comment because it went against his doctrine, went against his notion that God is restoring Israel, and this is God ordained, and you can't stand against it. You mustn't stand against it. I want to invite you to suggest ways of going forward. I'm going to really tackle it next week. I want you to give some really important thought to it. Are there ways that it can be resolved? What do you think a way forward would be? And here's a comment from a lady. Yes.
Oh, going back to your previous question, when I told the friend I was coming to this class, and she reminded me about Abraham's promise that he would have the land to the Jews. And so I learned some things today, and I'll share those with her. In fact, I took some pictures of your slide. The other thing I want to talk about is I was in Israel about 4 years ago, and I saw that wall. And when they told me that there are Palestinians that live on the other side, and they're not allowed to go even to the Mediterranean Ocean, I mean, I couldn't believe it. That 300-mile long wall separating them.
Yes. Yeah.
That was just an eye opener. And then as we were traveling in the bus, and they pointed out Palestinian enclaves of houses, small communities that had no electricity, no running water, because they're not allowed to have that there.
Yeah.
I mean, when you go there yourself, your eyes are open. And that's why I encourage people to go on your trip. And then
Yes.
the other thing I wanted to share was Rick Steves has a wonderful 2-hour-long program where 1 hour is the Israeli side and the other side is the Palestinian side. It's a fantastic program.
1
And I
hour for
think-
one narrative and 1 hour for the other
Mhm.
narrative.
Yeah,
Okay.
not into big conflict, but how the people, how they feel.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I would just encourage you to go to his website, and I'm sure you can download it.
Rick
Yes.
Steves, I opened up
Mhm.
the session last week with his
Right.
opening
Mhm.
statement with his travel
Yeah.
lecture at the January series. It is really an eye opener to go to Israel, Palestine and have both narratives explained. We're going to go on this trip, as I've said, and I want to repeat it, in October 22, I think, to November 5 or 6. We're going to go to Israel, Palestine, and we're going to sponsor it, Kairos, West Michigan. We're going to have an Israeli guide, and we're going to have a Palestinian guide. And we're going to go to all the sites that are dear to Jews and all the sites that are dear to Arabs and to Christians. And I urge you to make, if you've never been there or want to see a little different perspective, please join us for that immersion trip in cooperation with Churches for Middle East Peace, CMEP, Churches for Middle East Peace. We've had May Elise Cannon, the executive director here in Holland and Western Michigan, at least on a couple of occasions. And she will be a part of the effort to bring that about. It is true that when you see what is happening to Arab Palestinians, your eyes are opened and you are able to understand why some of us really get agitated when the Israeli narrative is completely swallowed and rules the day in the United States. The default position in the United States is Arabs want to destroy Israel. And they are resisting, and we have every right as Israelis to defend ourselves and to fight back against them who fight us. Little is there any reference to the legitimacy of the grievances against the treatment of Israelis, Palestinians. There's no recognition that there is a reason why they're resisting. There's a reason for it. They're not happy with how they're being treated. And if you are being treated unjustly, you have a right to resist. And some would even say violently. Now, we are committed to nonviolence. Those of us who are in the peace movement are opposed dramatically to violence. That's what's making it more difficult, because when you're not using guns and weapons and missiles and tanks, you can be more easily manipulated and controlled. Except that the power of love and resistance actively and non-violently has a way of working under the soil and pushing that concrete which is overlaid the human spirit. When there's life and energy and truth and power and love that's released in a society, it brings about change. It brings about change. Here's a comment here, Tom. Bring the microphone to this lady in the front. Next week, we're going to really go the rounds on it. We want to get a resolution to this, and we want to have specific steps.
I was in Israel, Egypt, Jordan 2 years ago. When you're in Israel, you see a high standard of living because the Jewish people work for themselves. You go to the other countries and you see the way they live. No wonder there's jealousy and anxious and criticism, because they see a lifestyle that they'd like, but they can't accomplish. My question to you in relation to what we have studied so far, why can't we take religion out of this and divide the country into two countries? There are small countries all over the world, And why can't the Palestinians have their country and the Jews have their country without this religious part of it?
Thank you very much for that question. I think that maybe some people have an opinion on that. It's hard to separate out religion from society. From the earliest days in the late 40s, there was a movement to say Jews will have their country and Palestinians will have their country side by side at peace, and each fulfilling their own desires for their own country. Why didn't that happen? Why has that not happened? Does anyone have an idea about that? Milt,
Biblical?
yeah,
That's why it's not happening. Because the Old Testament kind of lays out a different picture.
yes, yes.
You know, I've often heard the idea that Israel wouldn't exist without American money. And I think
Milt
that's
has a
probably true.
comment in answer to this lady's very legitimate question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The guy in the black shirt.
Just a minute, I'll give you a mic. Here.
The idea of a two-state solution. Don't want to get off the track, but couldn't the same thing apply to Ukraine? The western half, is oriented toward NATO and Europe and the United States, the eastern half toward Russia. Wouldn't the two-state solution apply there as well?
Yeah. My sense, ma'am, in answering the question is that there have been historically Palestinians who have said Jews are interlopers. They don't belong in this country. So that emphasis is there, but Israel has become overwhelming in its domination of the land. And they are the one, there is a one state solution right now, and it is Israeli dominated. That's the one state. So that for them to allow Palestinians to have any control over their own destiny is an impossibility. It's not possible, because if you give them any autonomy, they will direct it against the Jewish state, against the Israeli state. What I like to do is, in talking about Israel, I like to distinguish between the Israeli state, which is a non-religious thing, and the Jewish state. I would rather not talk about what's there as the Jewish state. There are Jews that are there, but it is the Israeli state, and it is as we will see next week, the Basic Law of 2018 formalized that the Israeli state is for Jews, only Jews. So this prejudices the existence of the state for Jews and against anyone who is not a Jew. So why can't Arabs have their own country? Because to give them autonomy in our neck of the woods is to open the door to them destroying us. That's why. Here's a comment over here. And until that goes away, the trust factor is really a terrible, terrible factor.
We have to think of the
Pull your mask down, please. I can hear you better.
we have to think of what Jerusalem is, though. It's honored by both Arab or Muslim and Christianity and Jews.
Right.
So how do you divide a country with something that's such as concentrated as that, as the most important part of their
That's a
being.
wonderful comment. That's a very excellent comment. What the United Nations said early on, and we have supported it, our interpretation of the scripture supports this. Israel should be an international city for 2 peoples and 3 religions. It should be an international city so that everyone has access to their religious sites, their holy sites equally. And for Israel now to say, as since 1967, Jerusalem is only the undivided eternal capital of the Israeli state goes against the United Nations effort to have it be a city, an international city for 3 religions and 2 people. So they have resisted any shared sovereignty over Jerusalem. You cannot have shared sovereignty in Jerusalem. That is the status quo. So when you have people from Sheikh Jarrah, which is a neighborhood in Jerusalem, saying, don't demolish our homes, don't take this land away from us. The status quo says, we have control of Jerusalem. You are no longer in charge of this property. You must accept the fact that you are no longer welcome here. This is Jewish property. So that attitude is not about to disappear in the near future. This is the status quo. It is the one state that we Jews control. And get used to it. Get used to it. So Palestinians really are, they have no clout. They have no clout, and the United States is not taking their side. Congress is not taking their side. Biden is not taking their side. He talks a good game. But when it comes, push comes to shove, and the enforcement of American values of decency for all people in a country, and withholding any of the $3.8 billion we give to Israel every year, they're not willing to do it. They're not willing to really enforce American values because of the outcry of Jews in authority there. And enough Jews in the United States feel that way too, that you're attacking us and you're wanting to delegitimize us and you're wanting to have us go away. So until that attitude changes, the Palestinians are going to be underneath the heel of oppression, in my view. In my view, other comments or statements?
Well,
Tom.
one thing that occurred to me is that recently, well, during the Trump administration, the capital of Israel was moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
The embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
That was the embassy.
The embassy.
Okay. Did that have an effect on bolstering the Jewish Israeli
The effect
argument
of
about
that,
it?
the effect of that was the Trump administration was really wanting to come full bore in support of the Israeli state.
Yeah.
That has not been rescinded by Biden. He may be considering moving it back to Tel Aviv, which would disappoint the Israeli government right now. But the Trump administration was all out Christian Zionists. There was just no holding back. They have a right to the country. They have a right to treat the Palestinian terrorists any way they want to. And Biden is trying to reverse that, but he's not getting very far because he doesn't want to put any teeth into it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that we've had a good discussion today, and I thank you for tuning in to this from home or wherever you may be. And I want to say next week, I've really done a lot of work. I've done some rearranging of that PowerPoint, and it's going to happen next week. We're going to look at the one state democratic model. We're going to look at confederation. We're going to look at some of the stressor points that are preventing a resolution and some ways forward. So please come back next week, and thank you for your participation.
Well, and thank you, John, for your efforts, and you're making a lot of things plain that have been argued about for a long time. Hopefully
Thank you.
it gives us all a little better look at what the conflict is all about
Thank you.
and how we can decide how we want to approach it.
Yeah.
So thank you again.
Thank you.
we'll
And
see
thank
a
you
week
to
from
everybody
today.
who joined us at home. Everyone stay
Oh,
safe
and
on the
people at home,
roads.
stuff.
Take care.
Thank you for joining us
Bye-bye.
at home.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Tom.